Okay, everybody, welcome to week 2. So hopefully everybody had a hopefully everybody had a good week as far as for week 1, and you guys got to experience as far as acoustics. So hopefully you picked 2 different rooms that were quite different, and you got to really see everything from setting up gain levels on your microphones to how your vocal actually sounds different depending on which room you're in, how the acoustics can actually affect the actual recordings of any microphone. So that's where we had you actually go and record in 2 different rooms, was so that you could actually listen and start hearing how important the acoustics can be. You could use acoustics to your advantage sometimes. Sometimes you might actually want a certain sound, so you would go and record in certain areas. With the audio file formats, data compression, hopefully everybody got to see how literally you can spend hours mixing, and if you don't know or understand as far as how the audio file, the master mix that you're bouncing down, you have different formats, and if you don't understand how they work, quite often you'll just select, hey, I'm going to just save it as an MP3 and send it, but not knowing you could actually destroy your song that you just spent hours mixing. So that's why we felt it was important for you guys to really understand file formats of data compression. Now, as always, I always like to open up the mics for you guys. I'm going to go ahead and open up the mics, so mute your mics if by chance you have TV or something in the background. But let's see if there's any questions. Okay, looks like I'm going to have to go through and mute some mics. So, is there any questions as far as from last week's assignment? Doesn't look like any questions. All right, well then let's move on to this week's assignments. So guys, for this week, what we're going to be doing is the besides quiz 2. Quiz 2 is actually due, as you guys can see, on the 6th, so it's on Wednesday. But the next 2 main assignments for you guys is going to be the Immersive Audio Skills Development Part 1 and the Immersive Audio Skills Development Part 2. This is where we really get into start learning about what the different devices that we use. So dynamic processing, for instance, and even time-based processing. Let's go check out Part 1, first of all. Now, as always, we give you guys some instructions as to what you need to do. This one's actually pointing you towards lynda.com a little bit. Go watch the audio mixing boot camp. We give you all segments, so view chapter 8, which is learning about EQ. This whole assignment, the audio skills development part 1, is actually covering the EQ. So it's talking about everything from graphic to parametric EQs to filters, high pass, low pass filters, to shelving EQs. And that's what we're mainly going to be learning about in this whole assignment is EQs and how to use them and what each one of these different knobs mean. Now, one thing I want to point out real quick is for the lynda.com videos, they use this EQ right here. This is a Pro Tools EQ. It's called a DigiRack EQ. Understand that all EQs will all have basically the same parameters. They all will have a frequency knob. They will all have a bandwidth knob or Q knob, and they will all have a gain knob for parametric EQ. If you have a graphic EQ, they're just going to have a amplitude at a specific frequency. So that's what we're going to show you, but I wanted to make sure that you guys got the understanding that, first of all, the video in lynda.com shows you on this actual EQ, but since we're working in Logic, here's how it easily translates over. Right here you can see frequency, the first row. You could actually click on a number, type it in, or click and drag. it will change the frequency. As you guys can see, the next row is amplitude, and I'll explain what each one of these things that I'm talking about mean as well. But you have amplitude or gain. Again, you could just click on it, type it in, or click and drag. It'll change that parameter. And then lastly, Q or bandwidth. Notice that all those same parameters are on the DigiRack. So you have the exact same thing. Here you can see the whole graph, and I'm going to show you this is really useful. It's an analyzer. It's going to show you what's happening frequency-wise, and also you'll get to see how your EQ is set up. Same thing with the Pro Tools one. It shows you basically how you have the EQ curves that you've set up. So understand that they both are exactly the same. It's just different front plate, you might say. Programming wise, they're basically the same thing. We have you actually, for this assignment, we're going to have you download a file. You guys can see it right here. It's the Immersive Audio Skills Development file. This file, which is a logic session, is going to be used for both part 1 and part 2. So you just need to download it once, and you'll reuse this same file later for part 2, which is due Sunday. Once you download it, you'll rename it, of course. And in the track notes, and let me show you what I mean by that. In the track notes, we actually give you physical instructions as to what to do. And where did it go? Ah, there it is. Okay. So when you have a track selected, over here, notice you have a notepad. You could easily turn on and off. It should be already on because it was saved that way, but the notepad, you have the whole project and track notes. Track notes change depending on which track I've got selected. With the project notes, that's for the whole project, you'll notice it doesn't change. So definitely know that you need to select track notes for it to change and give you a different set of instructions. And you just follow the instructions for that actual track. So first one you're going to be working with is know that this is these are just different separate sounds that we want you to work with. They're not for you to mix a whole thing, because this will make absolutely no sense if you just unsolo all these tracks and hit play, because they're just separate sound tracks. First one is white noise. White noise, you may recognize it as, you know, if you've got like an old TV and you were going between channels, it's something that wasn't anything broadcasting onto that channel, you'll hear that type of noise. And I've got my output solo. You might recognize that noise. It's called white noise. But we'll actually be using that because it has every single frequency inside of white noise. Shows every single frequency across the whole audible spectrum. And we can then view and see how the EQs affect this. The other thing I need to point out also is, if for whatever reason you do not see the track notes, then what's happened is that you have Logic, the preferences, the advanced tools, you have it set to the standard. You need to go to the advanced tools, and right here you can see if I unclick it, it now shows these wooden sides on the side of Logic. That tells me it's almost like it doesn't have as many features. It's a scaled down version. We want you to have all the features and all the tools that Logic is capable of, so we engage it and put it in advanced tools. When you have it in the standard mode, not advanced, the track notes actually don't show up. Only the project notes show up. So if you don't see the track notes, know that that's what's happened. You just don't have, or if you see the wood sides on the side of Logic, you'll know that you won't be able to see the track notes. So definitely change that if you do have Logic set up as standard. Now let's see. Real quick, I'm looking through here as far as what you guys have typed. Pro Tools and Logic the same. Yes, basically all equalizers are doing the exact same thing no matter which DAW you're in. And that's what we want you to understand. An equalizer, even if it's external, if you have an external equalizer in your system, you know, that's analog, it'll work the exact same way with these digital plugins, EQs. And I'm going to show you a couple of them really here in a second. Alright, so let's go back here and then we'll run through the whole thing. You'll notice that you need to follow the track notes, follow along what it says, and for this assignment you'll be working with tracks only 1 through 4. So for part 1, you're only going to be working with 1, 2, 3, 4. These 4 tracks. That's it. That's all you need to do for part 1. So follow the instructions there. You'll notice that here it also says, as well as should say over there, where you're going to have to write a few sentences about what you've learned or heard from the process applied to each track. So we don't want you to describe what the sound is, like describe what white noise is or the 100 Hertz square wave. We want you to describe what's happening when you're turning these knobs on the EQ. What are you noticing? What are you seeing that you could actually control? So part of the assignment is you're going to be writing a couple sentences for each track. So that means for track 1, a couple sentences. For track 2, when you're working with track 2, a couple sentences. You'll be taking screenshots also of each one of these tracks. So a lot of times, most students, what they do is they take the screenshot, they write a little bit, they put all this in Word, so they're able to bring their screenshot into Word. Then underneath the screenshot, they write what they basically have learned from it. The screenshots, let me point out what we probably want. We want the, here, let's open this guy up. Nope, wrong one. Actually, I don't have it set up there. All right, so we're gonna have you guys actually set up an EQ, channel EQ. This one shows you the most. So for instance, my screenshot would look somewhat like this. I'd have whatever I messed around with the EQs, and I'll show you all about this in a second. But my screenshot would be like this, where it shows my EQ open and that track selected. You will also be saving the Logic session and re-uploading it with your work done in it. We don't want just the session set right back to us with no work in it. We want you to show your work. In other words, when we download it and open up the session, we'll see your EQ settings and everything that you set up. For now, let me bring these guys back down. All right. So let me go over a quick explanation of EQs and so forth. Now, let's see. By chance, you guys may remember or have seen something like this in your parents' home stereo, or even sometimes car stereos. You'll see these little like faders. So you had a multi-band EQ, or this is a graphic EQ is what they call this. Here you can see it's for left and right. The graphic EQs where we could actually start off because of the fact that you guys have probably seen this somewhere, whether it's at a home stereo or something like that. Graphic EQ at least gets you the idea of what's happening. Now, we have graphic EQs as plugins. Let me open up a graphic EQ real quick. Under audio units, Apple, we have right here a real nice graphic EQ. So just like that picture, you can see you have multiple faders, and here I'll reduce it down to 10 bands. So you have something similar to what I was just showing you as far as what you may have remember from your parents' home stereos or something like that. Now, what does an EQ do? Easy, simple way of explaining what an EQ is: think of it as you actually have a volume fader for different frequencies. A graphic EQ, here you can see 10 band, I can actually have volume faders for 10 different frequencies. Now, does it affect only that one single frequency? No. It actually affects basically, like, let's say right here, this 512. When I bring this up, it's going to affect all the frequencies up to the 512 and back down. And it's going to have this almost like a bell shape as far as the amount of volume that it controls. So if I bring it down, the bell shape would start affecting frequencies from 256 all the way to 1000, but it would be downwards. Now, real quick, just to show you this, let's go ahead and hit play. I'm going to make sure everybody else is turned off. Oops. Where are we? This is the, okay, this is the one we want. So, this is the only EQ on that white noise track. I'm going to hit play. I just hit the spacebar, that's all I need to, or you could hit play over here. You guys could hear it. I grab a different frequency. So you can see it's basically, I've just got a volume capability for a single frequency. Now let me turn on something to show you guys. I have set up, there's two different methods to view this, to see what's actually happening. And what I've done is on the output, I put a multimeter, and let me open that up. Now I'm going to show you both the multimeter and the frequency analyzer. The multimeter plugin is actually here. I'll show you exactly where it's at. If you go under metering, you'll see multimeter. You can select that, and right now I put it on the stereo output. That way anything I do I can see. All this is a plugin to visually see what's happening with the audio. If I hit play, EQ, you can see it's here. I could even bypass it by turning it off. You can see right there all the energy that's, you know, as I hit play, it's playing. All that energy is viewed here on this frequency analyzer. I'll bring it up. I guess as high as it goes. All right. Now, notice that when I bring up 512, oh, I need to turn it on. Right here, 500, you can see I created a little boost there just by bringing up this, and you can see how it affected more than just the 512. Now, the multimeter is a nice plugin to show you stuff, but I actually like better, and I'll show you this one. If you just use the channel EQ, you turn that one on, turn off that one. Channel EQ actually has its own built-in analyzer as well. So I'm not going to use the EQ for anything on this channel, because you never want to really EQ the output of your mix. You want to EQ each individual track. But I'm just going to use it for the fact that it has an analyzer and I can view everything. Let's bring this guy back down. Hit play again. You'll see what white noise would look like across the spectrum. You'll see that there's enough energy all the way across. Here you can see that line there is what's happening. That's every single frequency across the spectrum. You have equal energy. Now, if I take my graphic EQ, let's go to 1K this time, and I bring it down. Notice what's happening. What happened over here? I actually notched out frequencies. It affects everything from around 500, you can see from here, to around that 2K, which is that bell shape I was kind of telling you about. Now, with the graphic EQ, let me hit stop. With the graphic EQ, I'm only able to control the number of frequencies that it actually is set up. Like this one's 10 band. I can go to 31 band. 31 band would be much more control, and at the same time those bell-shaped curves are going to be a lot smaller. They're not going to affect as many frequencies. Let's try that same thing. Here's the 1K. Yeah, I'll bring it down again. Notice this time I'm only affecting not as much. It doesn't go all the way over to 2K and 500. It's a lot tighter. But again, all I could do is bring it up or down. I can't control how much bandwidth. I mean, that's what you're actually playing with, and I'll show you how to really understand bandwidth real soon. And I can only control that, and I can't change the frequency, so it's fixed. It's at 1K. My graphic EQ can only control the level at one frequency, and I can't change its Q or bandwidth. That's that bell shape that I was talking about. So now let's go ahead, and I'm going to turn off that, bring up some other EQs. Here's a graphic EQ called Vintage Graphic EQ. It's one of the plugins. You can see this is basically a graphic EQ. But notice this one. This is copying something like the Focusrite Red model EQ. You'll notice it has 3 knobs here, 3 knobs here, 2 knobs here, and then you have a low pass and a high pass with a single knob. Technically what we have is 2 filters, a high pass filter, a low pass filter, 2 shelving EQs. Here you have the low shelf, and over here you have the high shelf, and 2 parametric EQs. Now, the cool thing about this is a graphic EQ, remember I said could only control one frequency. But with the parametric EQ, well, I could change the frequency, I could change the Q or bandwidth, so in other words how many frequencies I'm affecting, and also the gain, in other words the level. So let's turn this guy on, and then I'm going to jump over to the channel EQ, which is the one we want you to use, but I want to show you how they're all the same thing. So I'm going to hit play. I turned on that EQ. Over here we're going to use this one for the analyzer just to see it. Here you go. I am going to grab 1.2K, bring it up, bring it down. You can see I'm affecting quite a bit still, and here's where I change that. I'm affecting a lot more frequencies, or fine tune it, and notice it's now just affecting a little bit at that 1.2K. I could sweep the frequencies. And do just about everything else. Now each EQ has the same parameters. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the channel EQ, which is the one that really gives me a lot more capabilities. This is emulating an analog piece of gear that's out there. Focusrite made a EQ, the Red Series EQ, which is pretty popular back in the day, so that's why they made a digital version of it. And let's go over to the channel EQ. So this is the same one as this one. Remember, this one's just sitting on the output, and right here I have this one sitting on the actual track. That's the one I want to mess with. I'm just using, again, this one is a way of viewing stuff. So hit play. I can go here to 700, move it over to around that 1K. Here is my amplitude, so that was frequency, the stock pro. Second row is amplitude. Third row down here is Q. So let's go ahead and bring this guy down. You can see I brought it down minus 24 dB. Notice over here, just looking at the output, I'll scoot it over. I brought down So that's 24 dB down that at 1K. 1080 hertz to be more exact. Here I could type in, just double click on it, type in 1000, it'll be exactly 1K. The bottom number, your Q or bandwidth, both of them mean the exact same thing. All I'm doing is how many frequencies I'm affecting besides that center frequency. The 1K is called the center frequency. If I bring this up, notice I can really tighten it down to where I'm just making a single little notch right here at that 1K. Or I could do the opposite, to widen it quite a bit, where now I'm affecting a lot of frequencies. So your EQ, you're really able to fine-tune any kind of sound you want. And your EQ is very important. You could actually change the whole way a sound actually sounds. Like for instance, we're listening to white noise. If I want to physically take away a lot of the high end off of that white noise and just sweep it across, I could turn this into what sounds like a waterfall. I could make it sound where it sounds like a jet engine. I could make it sound like practically anything just by using the EQ. Now, let me bring up one other thing. You guys look at this. This is the EQ, the graphic EQ, or I should say it's channel EQ. In that, you have underneath, of course, the numbers that I was just showing you. You actually have 4 parametric EQs. So each one of these rows basically is one parametric EQ. You have a high shelving EQ. You have a low shelving EQ. You have a low pass filter and a high pass filter. One other thing I want to point out is sometimes these can be called by the opposite, which is low cut filter and high cut filter. Because if you think about it, if you're allowing the lows to pass, you're technically cutting the highs. So whatever terminology you might hear, they mean the same thing. A high cut filter and a low pass filter are the exact same things. Filters, you may also, if you're into synthesis or anything, you've probably heard of low pass filters, high pass filters. There are not a lot of synthesizers for you to be able to create sounds. Same type of technology, same thing. You could actually create sounds right from your EQs here. Let me show you again. I'm going to go ahead and hit play, and we're going to start messing around with, let's say, the shelving EQ and the filters. So when you start running through these, you'll actually get to play around with each one of these I'm going to be showing you, and we actually have you at the very end, track number 4, the applied EQ lesson. We have some problems in a recorded vocal, which is actually me. Recorded myself with 2 physical recording problems that happen a lot in some studios. I've seen this so many times that I wanted to make sure you guys understand, hey, I can use my EQ to fix those problems in that recorded vocal. But let's go back to the white noise and let's start seeing how we could actually control stuff. Let's go to the filters. At the end, we have these filters, and we can turn them on and off, or any of the parametric EQs or the shelving EQs, just by clicking on it up here with that symbol. You'll get used to these symbols too. Whenever you're dealing with EQs, this will mean it's parametric. This will tell you it's a shelving, and depending on which direction it's facing, you'll see if it's a high shelving or a low shelving. And the same thing with the filters. This symbol will signify a filter. And that will be a low pass filter, and over here a high pass filter. But back to the filter. This is what a filter does. We can actually select. One other thing I guess I should point out too is, besides turning the knobs or changing the actual frequency, I can actually, as you guys can see, change it here. Or this is the cool thing about Logic, I can actually even do it right here. Just move this ball around, and I'm able to change the parameters. As you guys can see, if you watch over here, it's changing the frequency of that filter. The way the filter works is we have, of course, the frequency. That's where the filtering physically starts. We have right here how the filter is filtering. Right now it's at 24 dB per octave. I could actually change it to 48, which is the maximum, or to 6. And notice what it does is this curve that kind of filters out, in this case the highs, it actually is 6 dB per octave, or I can make it as tight as possible to the 48, so it's more drastic. So we'll hear more of a change. If I hit play, you can see I could use a filter, and I'm slowly sweeping across, and you can see how I could filter out. I'm literally blocking out or filtering out those high frequencies. So I'm allowing only the lows to pass, hence why it's called a low pass filter. I could literally sweep it all the way across to where you basically don't really hear anything. You know, you're only getting some information here at 20 Hertz. And most of us with the headphones or even some of the smaller speakers can't really hear 20 Hertz. But if I sweep it across, you can hear that. Now if I think about if I was able to just modulate this, it almost sounds like waves. So you can actually automate an EQ to create sound effects. And this is what synthesizers are basically doing, the same thing. They're filtering out the waveforms. Now, the next one you can see down here, the Q or bandwidth of that, I can make it to where it actually starts bringing up to where it self-resonates. This is much like what we call the resonance on a filter. A lot of keyboards will have that resonance knob. This is doing the exact same thing. So if I were to filter out some of this, I'm going to bring in the low pass. The high pass. Imagine I'm inside of a jet plane. It would sound something like this. And if I want to hear the jet plane, basically the engine's revving up, you just sweep across. You guys have probably heard something like that when you guys were taking off. If you're riding on a jet, flying somewhere. So you can see how your EQ is pretty powerful. You can do quite a bit. Your filters, let me go get rid of this one. I'll come back to that one in a second. So here is again your low pass filter, allowing low frequencies. You're able to filter out all those frequencies. Now, I'm going to bypass that. This is your high pass. You guys can see how I can literally get rid of all the low frequencies. Now, a filter filters them out completely. So we lose them completely. But what if I don't want to lose all the frequencies completely? I just want to bring up or down that high frequencies of the whole track or the low frequencies of the whole track. That's where we use our next EQ, the shelving EQ. So let's try that. Let's go ahead and hit play again, and I'm going to use this high shelving EQ. Make the whole thing brighter. Make the whole thing a little darker. Notice that what it does is it shelves out. It goes to a certain point and then just basically stops, doesn't continue downwards, getting rid of those frequencies altogether. What it does is it attenuates all the frequencies from that single point. Right now I'm at minus 8.5 dB. So from this frequency, it basically brings everything down by 0.5 dB. I can also boost. A shelving EQ can give you the capability of boosting from that point on. The filters cannot. They will not let you boost in those on the opposite ranges. You could only cut. If anything, you could give that resonant peak right at the frequency only, but it will not do the same thing as what the shelving that you guys are seeing me work with right now. The other shelving unit right here, this one's for the low frequencies. You can see I can boost the lows or cut. So, hasn't gotten rid of them. They're still there. It just brings them down. Now, for you guys who might be guitarists, this would be very much like your tone knob. And you may even see a tone knob on some stereos, some older stereos. That's all that's happening, is you're basically cutting the lows, or shelving the lows, or shelving the highs with a tone knob. But that's how you could work with these guys. To zero out anything, all you have to do is just hold down Option and click on it. You'll see it automatically jumps to 0. Well, that's basically what an EQ does. You're able to control a certain amount of frequencies. Now, I can combine stuff, like if I grab my high pass and my low pass, I should have said those backwards the other way. Make this 48. So as you guys can see right there, I am basically killing all the low frequencies and all the high frequencies. So all I'm allowing to happen to go through is my mid frequencies. You can see here, I've taken it out completely. I've taken it out completely. So highs are gone, the lows are gone. By grabbing a high pass and a low pass filter, I've created what they call a band pass, because I'm only allowing certain bands of frequencies to physically pass through. For the people who have used synthesizers, you may have heard band pass filters. That's what basically you're doing. You're combining a low pass or a low pass and a high pass filter to giving you a band pass filter. Get rid of these. Now, as you guys walk through the instructions, you'll get a little bit more ideas to what you're actually doing with these different filters, parametric EQs, and shelving EQs. That's why we want you to kind of mess around with these things. We give you a couple different sounds to listen to play around with. And then the last track, I'm going to go ahead and hit play.
By using your EQ, you're able to remove unwanted frequencies and make the vocal clearer. By using your EQ,
you could hear my voice recorded there. And if you looked over here on the analyzer on the output,
by using your EQ, you're able to remove.
Here, I'm going to do something just to make this easier to show you guys, because otherwise you have to watch. I'll close the notes for right now. I'm going to loop. Come on. There we go. Loop the area where there is no vocal. So by looping that area, oh, I left a little bit of tail end of my vocal there. Alright, let's try this. There we go. You can see it's looping right now, and there's no vocal. Let me enlarge that for you guys. All I need to do is hold this down. You can see I can enlarge waveforms for each track. Notice there's a high-pitched squeal and also a very low frequency happening. Now, just from what I've shown you guys, you should be able to grab your EQs and get rid of those two problems. You can actually EQ out just the problems without touching my vocal. This is why we're saying you could almost surgically remove different frequencies. So by the time you end up getting through the first 3 and have had, plenty of experience, you get to play around with this, then you get to try it out. I want you to try it on your own. In the instructions, we actually give you the, the actual ending resolve that'll help you. If you didn't get it or you still can't understand it, give it a try, follow those instructions. But I want you to try it out on your own first. See if you could tackle it once you've really got to start learning how to change the frequency, the amplitude, and the bandwidth of a parametric EQ, as to see how I can get rid of that high-pitched squeal without messing with my vocal. Because otherwise I could really change the vocal. Let's go ahead and I've got 4 selected, so let's come over here. I'm going to grab an EQ again, channel EQ. Remember the filters, if I were to actually grab and make a bandpass filter, turn on the high pass. Look what happens to my vocal, and I like to show you guys this because this is how I could say I could make it creative. I could remove the 2 problems, but I also affect my vocal a lot. Oh, I need to take that loop out.
To remove unwanted frequencies and make the vocal clearer. By using your EQ, you're able to remove unwanted.
See, I actually sound like I'm coming out of a very old radio or an old telephone. I got rid of the 2 problems, but I also sound horrible. So I wouldn't want to use this unless this is something you're wanting as an effect. But if you're mixing, let's say, Beyonce or somebody like that, if you gave her back and she sounded like that, it would be very nasally, it would sound horrible, and she'd be looking at you like, you destroyed my vocals. So understanding how to use your EQ, you could actually manipulate certain frequencies, and in my case with this track I would want to get rid of the that high pitch problem and the low frequency problem, and leave my vocal unscathed, untouched. And you can do that. So what I want you to do is, after you've finished the first 3, go ahead and jump on the 4th one and use your EQ to get rid of those 2 problems. We're going to have you, besides take the screenshot, with whatever, let's say, I'm going to turn this on so that way it shows something on the screen. But if this is what you decided, this was how I needed to work the EQ to get rid of those 2 problems, take the screenshot. But we're also going to bounce this down. In other words, I want just this track so I can actually hear it and play it and see how well you did. All you have to do is make sure it's the only track, so I'm going to solo it. How do you bounce? Well, you guys should remember this. You can go right here to bounce, project or selection. The other method to bounce is, of course, if you have the output showing up right here, you'll see there's a quick button right here that says bounce. Click on that, and once again we have our capability of bouncing down. Now this is spoken word, so we could actually use 128 kilobytes. For spoken word, there's not enough frequency information. I don't produce really low frequencies in my voice, nor can I produce super high frequencies. So for an MP3, 128 for spoken word, perfect. I'll sound pretty good. If it was music, of course, you'd want it to be much higher. And I bounce down that MP3. Name it. For now, it'll be just track 4. We actually should use the name, track 4, then your name, or whatever. Where are you? There you are. Alright. You always, if you're working for any client and you've produced your file, your MP3, or even if it's a non-compressed file, an AIFF or a WAV file, you always want to come and go listen to it. All you have to do is select it, hit your space bar, and you'll notice it pops open, and we can hear everything you recorded. I could even see how much time the total length is, which is 15 seconds. I can hit the spacebar again or click close, and that closes it. But that verifies, because one thing I've seen a lot of students do, for instance, let's say they only had this area selected, they bounce it down, I would only end up with a couple seconds of audio. In other words, I would not hear the whole song. How horrible would it be that you just sent a commercial or a mix that you did that's supposed to be on the air that night, and you sent them only 2 seconds of your song or of your commercial that's supposed to be a 60-second commercial, or it's normally a 3 minutes 50-second song. So definitely always get into the habit of, once you've bounced something down, if it's the final mix, you want to listen to those things. That's just a piece of advice. Always go make sure that whatever your bounce came out correct. Something could have glitched. You could have accidentally had something else selected. So when I bounce it down, it's really short. So if something happens, definitely, that's always a good habit, is to get and listen to the final product one more time directly as the final product, not anymore in Logic. All right, let's close this. Close this for right now. Come back to the instructions. Just to finalize everything, again, remember you need to write 2 to 4 sentences about what you heard and learned about each track, along with the screenshot. You need to name your session. Your Logic session will be called now your last name, your first name, and then Immersive Part 1. And you'll need to upload that. Also, remember, we're going to be bouncing down the audio for track 4 with the EQ settings engaged. In other words, I want to hear my voice without those 2 problems that we originally had. As always come and check the grading checklist. You'll notice here we have the screenshots. Okay, do we have screenshots? Yes. Did we do 2 to 4 sentences about each track? There it is, each track. Submitted the Logic Pro session, named. And the last thing you can see, submitted the bounce of the cleaned up vocal track. And have that one at 128 kilobytes per second. That should be pretty good. All right. Real quick, I'm kind of glancing through just to see what you guys have typed. I'll also open up the microphones for you guys, so you guys can ask away any questions that you might have. Here we go. I'm gonna mute that TV. All right. So any questions for me on this one?
Yes, sir. I have one for you right fast, if you don't mind.
Yes, Joshua, go ahead.
When you're working with the EQ, like let's say you're wanting to work on just a specific part of the track, when you cut that track into like a little segment, does your EQ just apply that one little place that you cut, or does it still affect the whole track?
Whenever it's placed on the physical track, it affects every single audio snippet that you might have on that track, always.
Okay.
Now, if for whatever reason you only wanted it to affect one spot, you could either A, move it to that little section to a new track, so that way it's the only thing that plays there, or you can automate this. I could actually just automate the bypass, for instance, if I wanted to, or I could automate the actual parameters. And you'll learn about automation a little bit. I'll show you a little bit, and then also as you guys go through other courses, you'll be learning more in depth. Everything kind of starts off here, and then it builds from there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions for me? Let me also look through here. Which one do we need to use for this assignment? As far as what EQ, I recommend using the channel EQ, which I see someone else also answered. So thank you, Brian, for answering that. But the channel EQ is a great one to start with.
I have a question about track 1.
Yes. So going back to track 1.
I get the instructions what to do on the rest of them, but number one, I'm kind of confused on what to write and what the screenshot.
All right, with the writing and the screenshot, I'm not sure I follow. So
yes, for track 1.
All right, so track 1, I have track 1 selected right here. It's the white EQ. This would be my channel EQ. So you're gonna actually be running through and messing around a little bit. So let's say you left off here or whatever. This is what I would just need as a screenshot. Just the white EQ open. You'll notice on the top of the channel EQ, it will name it depending on which one you're working with. So this one, for instance, let's go ahead and add an EQ on that one. Go under EQ, channel EQ. You'll notice this one's called 100 Hertz square wave. So it's named the same as the track. That way I don't accidentally go to another track. I'm listening to the white noise and think that I'm messing with the white noise track. Because then otherwise I could turn this EQ all day long. I'll never hear it affect anything because of the fact that I've got the white track soloed. It's playing through, but my EQ that's visible right now is the 100 Hertz EQ.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Okay, well, yeah, I get it. I was just thinking too much.
Okay. Let's see.
Appreciate it.
Sure.
So you do want a screenshot for each track?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Save live session. Joey's asking, how do save the live session? If I'm understanding you correct, are you talking about right now the recordings of that we're doing? For instance, we're recording this and it's going to end up in the archive? Because that's all we do. I record this and basically upload it to the archive for you guys to be able to see it whenever you guys want. So for instance, tonight, after we finish the session, I'm going to go in and start processing it, sending it up to the YouTube spot that I have, and then I will add the links to everybody's course. So by the time it's usually end up by midnight tonight, I'm going to have it so that you guys could go view this recorded, or the one that we're doing right now live, session, and it'll be in the archives. If that's what you're asking, hopefully that answers it.
I have a question.
Yes, yes, Samar.
For track number 4, what are the two things that you are looking for, or is it in the notes that you're looking for us to filter out?
All right, well, track number 4, if you listen to it, I mean, I'm just going to loop that beginning half. So,
okay.
Right. I probably have too short of a time because I'm not really hearing anything. Oh, because I have it filtered. Let me get rid of this. So, you guys should hear, and I apologize, I'm going to have to mute one mic there. You should hear, if you hit play on that, underneath my vocal, you'll actually hear something in the low end. And what it basically is sometimes some studios, when the electrical systems in that studio and they have not done their wiring correctly, they end up with something called a ground loop. You may have heard a ground loop also sometimes at a concert. If they've set this up incorrectly, you could end up with what they call ground loops. And what it is the 60 hertz coming from the wall, the power, you actually get that and it gets into our audio systems. So I could actually use an EQ to get rid of that problem.
Cool.
So in that recording, I pretended like we had a bad wiring condition in that studio that they recorded the vocal in, and I put that problem in there. The other problem is a high frequency problem that happens with fluorescent lighting, for instance, or if they have a TV monitor right next to the guy recording. The old analog TV, CRT type tube TVs used to put out high frequency, as well as also fluorescent lighting put out a high frequency tone. And that could end up in the recording. So I pretended that I had a really bad studio that had grounding problems, and also they were using fluorescent lighting in the vocal booth. So
Thank you.
sure, and you could use your EQ. I want you to use your EQ to basically take out those two problems without destroying my vocal to where it's not usable anymore.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you so much.
Sure. Anything else? Matthew's saying, that sounds like where I record, so I guess you've been to a studio where this type of situation has happened. That's why I use those two very common problems. They'll be in recordings, and then your understanding of EQs, you should be able to jump in there, fix those two problems, and not have to worry where, oops, I can no longer get this singer back in because she lives in California or somewhere, you know, and she already left. So I'm able to EQ out problems like that. Someone is asking, just to be clear, 2 to 4 sentences for each track and screenshot for each track. Yes, you are correct. So what we want is a screenshot, and then you'd write 2 to 4 sentences. You know, it could be more if you feel like it, but just give us, let me hear from you that you're understanding what's happening and what you're doing. This is just for us to be able to, I can go in and read, and I'm gonna, let's get rid of one more mic, sorry. Wrong one. Testing 1 2. Okay. There it is. Much better. All right. So, like I was saying, those sentences are for us to be able to. The instructors will read it. That way, we see if you're getting the understanding, if you're really getting the concept, because we want you to, you know, walk away with the actual concepts, not just, well, I turned the knobs and it sounded okay. We want to gather that, hey, I need to get to the student and tell them a little bit more, show them a little bit more, or do whatever it takes to actually get you to really understand the concept. That's why you're here. We're here to actually help you to truly understand these concepts. And I know they're basics. Some of you might even know some of these things, but for the few that don't, then definitely this is going to be very helpful. We're here to help you guys out, truly understand these stuff. Once you know this stuff, you just become so much more empowered with your mixes, as well as also you're able to quickly take care of problems. And I must say, just from my career, the sheer fact that I was able to work with artists and quickly take care of what they wanted me to, because I knew exactly what I needed to do, which knobs to turn, that gave me the capability of working with so many more artists, because everybody knew that, hey, I could go to Joe and he'll fix the problem quickly and take care of it for me, versus, oh, every time we go over there, we might sit an extra hour while he tries to figure out how to fix this problem. So knowing what to do definitely helps you guys out, and, you know, gives you longevity within your career. All right. Any other questions for me? Somebody's, I guess, talking about the advanced preferences. Yes. All you have to do is go under Logic, Preferences, Advanced Tools, and in there, just make sure this is checked. So Show Advanced Tools. That will give you the capability of showing both the project and the track notes, as well as a slew of other features. So just keep it in the advanced tools. You'll have a lot more capabilities in Logic than without it. All right, any other questions? Let me glance through here, see if I missed anybody's questions that they were typing. I don't really see anything. Nothing we've not answered already. All right. So, no other questions on this? All right. Just I see. I guess Joey's asking as far as the track side. Remember, Joey, that you have tracks selected, and then over here, as you select the different tracks, you'll see over here the notes change. So you should have everything that I'm seeing here on the side panel. As you guys select each track, it'll change. If for whatever reason this isn't there, this button right here is what brings it back and forth. So these are the notes. Also, just in case if you're new to Logic, another good way of using is this quick help button. Click on that and you'll notice that when you move over something, it tells you what in the heck that is. You know, what is this button? Oh, there it is. Horizontal auto zoom button. Vertical zoom slider. So you're able to see what each knob or button is within Logic. Very useful tool if you're definitely new to Logic. Alright, any other questions? Got all the info. Alright, if for whatever reason, Joey, you're not showing up all this information, definitely maybe re-download it. Because I know it's in there. So maybe something happened to the file or so forth. Just go ahead and re-download it. Give that a try. But all your instructions should be there under the track notes, not the project. Alright, if I don't have any other questions on the Immersive Part 1, let's go ahead and move on to Immersive Part 2 then. You guys can see Immersive Part 2 is actually due on Sunday. So let's go check that
Excuse me, Mr. Rivers.
Yes, go on.
It seems like all the instructions are the same for each of the top 4 tracks on my own.
You must have project selected. If you have project selected, it's only going to show the project notes. Also, you need to make sure, like we've been talking about, that your preferences have the advanced preferences. So,
Right, I have the advanced and it's on track. Well, everything seems to be saying the same thing for the instructions on my end.
try re-downloading it. If you, for whatever reason, continue to have that, we'll try to figure out. We'll see what's happening. But
Okay, it's cool. It's all right now.
It's all right now.
It's all right now. Yeah, I see it different.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So Immersive Part 2. Let's go ahead and tackle that one now. Immersive Part 2, we actually have you actually go and again view some more videos. All right, here we're going to be exploring compression. So here's where we can start learning about audio compressors. You're going to be learning a little bit about noise gates, de-essers, as well as also this is where we actually start showing you time-based effects and everything. You'll notice this right at the beginning. Where is it? For this project, you use the same session as you did for Immersive Part 1. But this time we're going to focus on tracks 5 through 9. So let's come over here and view. Well, here's 5 through 9. Notice that 5 has audio, 6 does not have audio. Track 6 is here just to help you. We're going to have you recording onto track 6 as you're messing around with the compressor on track 5, because as you'll learn, a compressor does a couple different things. Compressor will actually, the quick and simple thing is what they say is that it brings down the very loud stuff and brings up and level the very soft stuff. So it compresses our dynamic range. But you're able to do even more than that. You could actually mess around with the envelopes of a sound and create where it has a fast attack and a slow decay, for instance, as far as the compression and everything. So we want you to actually, for this, while you're messing here, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mute that, or I could solo it either way. So while it's muted, I could just hit solo. You'll see it engages it. Come over to this track. I'm going to put it into record. Now, when I hit play, I should say when I hit record, here, let's do that real quick. Oh, I guess I better take it out of loop. Or make the loop the whole thing. Let's undo this recordings. So as it record, you can see I'm recording what's on this track. But if I have a compressor on here, which let's go get a compressor. This track requires you to open up under dynamics. You'll see compressor. Select that. We'll turn on the Studio VCA compressor because there's multiple types of compressors. You'll notice here we have a digital, a VCA, a FET, a classic VCA, a vintage VCA, a vintage FET, and this opto. These are all different types of compressors and they will react differently to the sound. As you guys go through different courses, you're going to learn more in depth about, which one of these would be a good one to use for different things, different situations. But for now, we're going to show you the basics of how a compressor works. So let's go to Studio, and you'll notice there are 3 knobs. These 3 knobs, no matter which one I select, notice that stays. So every single compressor out there will have at least these 3 knobs. We have the threshold, we have the ratio, and the makeup, or sometimes you'll see it as gain. I'm going to shut off the auto gain so that way I'm actually controlling it via this knob. So what this does is as audio comes in, whatever we have our threshold set to, it will be the threshold for the compressor. In other words, once audio level hits that threshold, then the compressor kicks in and starts compressing. It will not compress until audio hits that threshold level that we are able to change and set. So if I have it to 0, well, basically my recorded level, and I'm just gonna bring down my output so I don't have to hear this so loud, but okay, so we have this little, almost like a little sound, syn hit sound. If I have my threshold to 0, you can see my meter right here shows nothing happening. I am not compressing whatsoever. If I bring this back, notice now my threshold has been hit. So this is how much gain reduction is happening every single time one of those bleeps hits. As the audio, I'll go ahead and stop for a second. As the audio goes back down below that threshold, then the compressor stops compressing. So we want you to use these things to start understanding how to set this up. Our threshold is practically the most important knob on there. That tells the compressor when and when not to compress. The next thing, the ratio. Now the ratio, what that does is tell it how much compression I want to happen when that threshold is hit. So if I have it right now, you can see it's 2 to 1. I can move it 1 to 1, so 1.0 to 1. If I have it 1 to 1, well, no compression is going to happen. So if you guys remember, the compressor was actually kicking in, but notice, well, 1 to 1, no gain reduction is going to happen. If I bring that up, now we see, like for instance right here, it's almost 8 to 1. We have 8 dB gain reduction every single time that threshold is crossed. My next knob is my makeup or gain on some compressors. This, see, once I've compressed down the loud signal, which is the one that goes above the threshold, I may want to bring up the whole thing because I literally quiet down the whole track. So I'm capable of bringing the whole thing. So I've squished down my dynamic range, if you guys can see me. I squished down my dynamic range, but now it's too low, so now I bring up the whole thing using the same amount of dynamic range. Well, let's try that out. You can see now I can bring it back up and level, but I still have the same amount of gain reduction. So what this does is, for instance, if you have a snare, I can make it sound where it's punching through and more even too. The drummer, for instance, he may not hit that snare drum exactly the same hardness, just as hard every single hit. If he hits it a little soft, it may not sound as loud. But with the compressor, we could actually make all those snare hits hit pretty hard, where they all sound equal and even. Same thing with a vocalist. If that singer is all over the place, in other words, they go soft, and then they go really loud, and then they go soft again, I can control their vocal a little bit better. We don't really want to use this as a volume, as a way of controlling a mix volume, but this evens it out a little bit better for us to be able to control it now within the mix a lot better to make it fit the actual mix. So this is where a compressor is really, really useful. Now, you'll notice, like for instance, this one has 2 more knobs. And some of them even have more knobs. These are all extra features that different compressors might have. The attack, what that is once that threshold has been hit, the compression, will it be immediate? In other words, will it take 0 milliseconds to physically start compressing? Or will it be more gradual to take 18 milliseconds or 80 milliseconds before the compression really comes in? This means that I could take, for instance, a snare hit, and if I have it at 0, it's going to immediately compress the snappiness of that snare. I tone down that snare. But if I want that snare to pop and really hit, I may want to bring back the attack. That way it allows those transients of the physical stick hitting that the drum head, giving you those transients, it allows them to go through really loud, but then it quickly compresses the rest of the snare hit to control how that snare, so it makes it really poppy. This is how you get those snappy snares that kind of cut through the mix. You're able to really control it. The attacks are really hitting. And that's done through compression. The next one you'll notice is release. Well, release basically does the opposite, which is once the threshold now gets crossed back below it, and the compressor would normally just kick off, no longer compressing. If I have this set to, the lowest on this one is 5 milliseconds, that means as soon as the threshold crosses below it, 5 seconds later, it kind of fades it out really quick and no more compression. But I could also bring it up so that I could have as much here as you can see, 520 milliseconds of decay or release on that compressor. So it kind of releases it a little bit over time. This makes it sound more natural. For instance, if I was on a vocal, I probably wouldn't want it to quickly turn off the compressor, because then it's going to almost be like this pumping or breathing sound that doesn't sound so good. Doesn't sound very natural. So I'll bring the compressor back as far as its release time. This gives me a little bit more natural sounding vocal. Those are all the parameters that mainly you'll see on compressors. Other ones, let me go over to this platinum one. For instance, you'll see this knee. The knee has to do with how this attack is going to affect. Is it going to be really quick, or is it going to fade into the attack point when it hits that threshold? See, the compressors, especially in digital, can really look ahead a little bit. One other thing that's pretty useful for you guys, let me go back to the studio one just from what we were setting up. You can actually click here on graph. This will show you the audio passing by, and then across the top show you the compression amount. So let's go ahead and set the threshold to 0. You'll notice no compression whatsoever. There's my hits. Let's bring back my threshold. Once I start getting to the point where it's just touching the tips, you can see a little bit of compression happening there. Bring it back more. You can see now it's being triggered a little longer. I could get it all the way to the point where you can see the compression is quite a bit, and it's almost not being not compressed. If I change my attack, you can see right now you notice how those bleeps aren't as loud. This is where I was saying you could tone down a snare hit, for instance, versus having it snappy. So your compressor gives you a lot of features and a lot of ways of really controlling the audio. Besides the level and trying to kind of making it or squash down the dynamics, I could also affect that level over time. In other words, using my envelope here, the attack and release, to really manipulate the tonality of, or the characteristics, I should say more so, of that sound. So very powerful tool. You'll get to experience, that's the compressor. Again, remember, no matter which compressor you're using, you're always going to have those 3 knobs, and the rest, the attack and release, is very common. And lastly, the knee. Input gain is just that, your input signal coming into the compressor, so that way you could bring it down, for instance, and have the threshold set at different settings. The output over here, output gain, you could bring down the output gain overall or bring it up. There is something also called a limiter. If I turn on the limiter, I could make it so that no matter what I do in the compressor, it manipulates the sound, but my output will never go above whatever I've limited the limiter to. So let's say I bring this back to -4, right here, 4.1 dB. My output level will never pass that -4. So they call this a brick wall type compression or brick wall limiting, where audio could no longer, once whatever you have set, that's that threshold, it stops the sound from going any louder than that. You'll see limiters on their own sometimes on sound systems for live concerts, because they don't want the engineer to keep pushing the loudness level, and the sound company ends up losing speakers because they're blowing up left and right because he's just pushing the system too hard. So a lot of times limiters are used to protect the sound system at a live situation, live venues and so forth. But you could also use them in the studio to control different things. Limiters are also used a lot when you start getting into mastering. But they're built in right into this compressor, so it's technically a compressor limiter. We're going to mainly have you guys mess around with the actual compressor itself. Now, as you go through the different tracks, again, we have you do different things. Let me bring up this track right here. Here you're going to see, here, let's go to the dynamics track. Here we're going to actually have you work with a gate. So come over to dynamics again, and we have noise gate. This is what a noise gate looks like. Notice that it has a threshold also has an attack and release. Now let's make sure we have that soloed. Take this guy off. So I'm going to mute this just so you could hear it. Here is what a gate can, or what a gate can do. If you hear this track, I hear a snare, but I could also hear the kick. I could also hear the hi-hats. Basically, whenever you record a live drummer, you're going to have microphones at each different drum spot. For instance, one for the kick drum, one for the snare, one for the overheads, for the cymbals. And the unfortunate thing is that, yes, I'm recording a snare with that microphone, for instance, but I also get the bleed from the other instruments right next to it. In other words, the cymbals, the hi-hats, everything ends up on that track as well. Now the snare will be the loudest on that track, but I still have all the other stuff. I can actually use gating to remove the other stuff and make it so that the gate only allows the audio from the snare to pass through. Now, I'm going to zero this out just to start and show you. If I set the threshold to minus 100, turn this on, well, it lets everything go through because the signal passes that signal level, that threshold level. If I bring this down to the opposite side, notice, yes, I'm still playing, but I lost the snare and everything. So my threshold is set so high that audio does not pass through because it never hits the threshold level. Let me grab this threshold now and bring it back slowly. Okay. Notice the snares. So it allows the audio to go through. Every single time a snare hits, you hear this little bleep, bleep, bleep. Well, that doesn't sound like a snare to me. It doesn't sound any good. So that's where you use these three controls. You have your tack. Your tack is, let me hit stop real quick. Your tack is, as soon as that threshold is hit, how fast will that gate open and allow the audio to pass through? I'll hit play again. If I bring this up to, you can see I could literally get rid of the whole attack of the sound to the point where you can't really even hear anything. Well, let's bring it back. Now the next one is hold. The hold, what it's doing is once that threshold is actually activated, it's past the threshold, the gate has opened, I will hold the gate open for X number of seconds. You can see 50 seconds here, 60 seconds. Now I'm getting more of the snare sound. But it still doesn't sound right because it's quickly closing on it. Well, I could open up the hold more, but now I'm hearing, you hear the little hi-hat happening afterwards. That's too much. So let's go back down. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and now turn up the release. That way it sounds more natural. I'm giving it back its decay of the sound. You guys can see right around there, I'm getting a full snare sound. So I went from this with all the extra noise that's on that track, because we consider anything that's not what's supposed to be on there noise, to this. So I'm able to physically clean up the track. Your gate is a pretty powerful tool. Now, whenever I have a delay or anything, which you guys will be learning about real soon, a delay on that track, it won't have a delay on the hi-hat. It'll only be on the snare. Or if I have reverb on that snare, it won't be on the hi-hat and the kick drum and everything else that's on that track. It'll only be on the snare hits. That's what makes this a gate pretty useful. For live, you might end up putting a gate on a singer. So imagine this, the singer's not singing, well, your gate closes up so it turns off that microphone. The singer walks up to the microphone, grabs the microphone, as soon as he starts singing, the gate opens up and allows that audio to go through. So for live engineers, the gate's very useful because he could sit there and not have to follow the singer and mute and unmute the track, so that way he doesn't get all this extra sound of a live microphone being up on stage as the concert's going on. So the gate's very useful in that situation as well. You will also see this has a ducker This could be used if you're like a radio station DJ, and I'll show you more details later. You could duck the audio signal. So if you've ever noticed, when a radio station DJ starts talking, the music will go down slightly. It won't turn off, but it will bring it down. And then when he stops talking, it brings it right back up. He's actually using a ducker for that. You could also use a gate configured correctly, which ends up being a ducker. You can actually, again, bring down the level of the music whenever the person is speaking. And that's via this side chain that you can set that type of thing up. And I'll show you guys later as we move through this, how to use side chain on gates, compressors, and everything else. But back to this. So you guys see, real simple. Threshold sets when the gate's going to open. The reduction knob, which I haven't really talked about, reduction is how much signal level is it going to be brought down. So for instance, back to the snare. If I bring this all the way to 0, well, yes, the gate's technically opening and closing, but it's not bringing it down in any level. If I bring it back just a little bit, still there, just brought down a little bit. Bring it down a little bit more. See, now the other noises in the background are being brought down. Normally, we always have this at 100 completely, so it just gives us only the snare. But if you wanted to use the gate to, for instance, only bring down the level, this is where you use that gain reduction. I've been asked multiple times, well then why bother? Why not just have it always at 100? Well, prime example of using a gate in the studio where you don't want total reduction is when you have one of these singers who sings and then he's always in between every single word. He breathes a lot, and when you hear back the recording, you're like, wow, I didn't notice, but he definitely is a loud breather when he's singing. So what I could do is set the threshold to where the singing part actually opens up. The gate allows it full volume, but when he stops singing and he's taking a breath, it brings down the level of that breath without getting rid of it. If you ever hear a recording, we want to hear the breaths only because it won't sound natural to us. If you hear a song where every single breath has been taken out, psychologically we hear this and we think something's wrong, and it's because we have not heard the guy breathe in the past 3 choruses or 3 verses or whatever. So leaving the breaths in is a good thing, but let's say we want to bring them down, you can actually use a gate to reduce those breaths down. So you can see a gate's pretty powerful. Let me bring this back to 100 because we're using a snare. Now the last track that you guys have is, so far, all of this stuff that we've been dealing with, the EQ, the compressors, the gates, we are changing that audio file. So these are dynamic effects. This is important. Know the difference. Dynamic effects will dynamically change your audio. But there are times that we want to add effects where we are adding an effect but not wanting to change the audio. So in other words, we've got the audio sounding exactly as we want. Let's say a vocalist. We got it all perfect. Then we want to add, let's say, reverb. Reverb, delay. These are time-based effects. And I have to show you how to set them up so that way you don't set them up where it does change the audio. In other words, using them as dynamic. We want to use time-based effects as time-based effects. So let's go ahead and solo this track. I'm going to actually borrow this gate. Hit Option, I can drag over, and it copies that same gate. Since this track is the exact same track, see, it's a snare. So now I hear a snare. let's add reverb to it. Let's say we've already EQ'd this snare. We like the way it sounds. We put a gate on it so that way it's just the snare. Now I want to add reverb. Well, if I add reverb onto the same channel strip, it's going to give me a washed out snare sound because it's just hearing the reverb. So the correct way to do that is we're going to send, as you guys can see, send some of the signal to an aux channel. So we select over here, send, we select a bus, and if you follow what it says there, it says select number 10. Let's release that, and notice as soon as I released, it created the send, bus 10, and if you hover over it, you see it says send number 1 goes to bus 10, which is feeding aux 1. You should have also noticed aux 1 track was actually created. As soon as you did that, Logic is smart enough to know that, oh, he's setting up a time-based effect, or he's setting up a send feeding an aux. It sets up the aux for you. It auto-names it aux 1 because it's the first one you've done. I can actually come over here, double-click that, and let's call this reverb. So, real short. Now, look what happens over here. Now when I hover over that, now it says send number 1 it is going to bus 10 feeding reverb. Cool. That means this aux, that's where I put my reverb. So now I come over to a plugin. You guys can see you have a whole lot of reverbs. This Chroma one is actually pretty cool. I'll go mono to stereo. So there's my reverb. If I hit play, well, I don't hear any reverb. Well, you've got everything set up correctly, but remember, this send is a feed. So it's some of the signals being fed this way. Until I turn the level up on this send, no level will get into that Chroma reverb plugin. So let's go ahead and hit again, and you'll notice over here the levels come up as I bring this up. So there you can see I've got a lot of reverb. It almost sounds like I just threw this thing into a warehouse, the snare hit. Let's say I have too much, but I like the way it sounds, but it's too loud. Now I can control the level of the reverb right here on this aux fader. So I'm in the same room, I'm just bringing down the amount of level of that reverb. I have my original signal, my dynamic. My gate, is dynamically changing that one. And it's feeding my reverb, which now I have full control of. Doing it this method, I get the original signal plus the reverb signal, and I'm able to control each one differently. And at the same time, if I have this set, let's hit play. If I bring this up, you'll notice both of these work together. If I bring it down, my reverb follows. I'm not stuck with just the reverb sound, so I don't have to automate this. I could just do my mix right here. This guy will automatically follow the levels because this send is actually post fader. And what that means is the signal is going through this volume fader before it actually feeds over to that Chroma reverb. So we have the send amount, how much of it's going to be sending it, and it's post fader, so it's controlled after this level. All right, let me real quick, I'm glancing real quick to see. All right, so is it always best to send the signal to a bus at unity gain? That's actually a great question. But if you're only sending one thing, sure. But let's say I have a snare, I have right next to it a vocal that I want using the same reverb. I can actually come over here, go to the same bus 10. Now I have the vocal and the snare hit. But I want the vocal to be louder with the reverb than the snare. At that point, I just bring these guys back. And you can see I am sending a mix, you might say. It's kind of like what I've done here with the different faders. You have a mix. You're able to then feed this reverb unit at different levels. So it kind of, you know, using it a unity gain. And just in case if you don't know what unity gain is, when I hit 0 right here, there I am. It says +0. When I'm at 0, that means the same amount of signal goes through that's coming in is being fed out. That's unity gain. So with this situation, as far as unity gain, it all depends on if it's the only thing. Sure, it's a good idea to send unity gain. You get plenty of signal, then you can manipulate it how you want it. But if you've got multiple things happening, you're going to set up a whole mix across these buses. So it gives you so much more control over what's happening with your reverb. As you guys get into the mix 1 and mix 2 assignments next week, you're going to get to play around with these things, and you'll start getting to see. I can actually use my faders, my panning, so fader, panning, and these time-based effects to locate stuff within your song. In other words, I can move it farther away, I can move it closer to me, I can move it left, I can move it right, and you have so much control over your stereo field with just these little simple things. Reverb, your pans, and your faders. So as you guys go through mixes and stuff, you'll see how this stuff is very important, and setting it up correctly can make, you know, a huge difference in your mixes. They can be so much more clearer, and you have so much more control. And that's why it's so important to set up time-based effects. Always need to be sent out via a bus feeding an aux channel. That aux channel is where you should have your reverb, your delay. Now let's set up a delay. I don't want to set up the delay on the same channel, because then it's going to be a reverb sound feeding the delay. Then we have a delayed reverb. That doesn't make sense. You want an actual delay, for instance. So what I need to do is you could open up a new send, go to a bus. In this case, let's use right next to it, bus 11. You'll see another aux channel immediately got created, aux 2. I'm going to go ahead and label that one. Labeling is always a good idea, only because it helps you figure out what in the world you're doing. Even if you save this session and walk away from it, 6 months later come back, you could look at everything, it's labeled, you'd be able to easily jump into this session without any problems. So I said delay, so let's grab a delay. Come over to, in the plugins, to delay. You have multiple delays to choose from. Let's grab a tape delay, I like that one. There's my tape delay. Now, when I hit play, well, I hear the reverb. I'm going to get rid of that reverb just for now, temporary. So I'm going to mute it. But I don't hear the delay. If you guys remember, I need to turn up the send. So now you can hear the original and then a delayed snare. I can bring it up or down. I could also change the delay features. So like the reverb, I could have changed the decay. I could have changed all these different parameters. You'll learn more in depth about each one. It's just right now, we're just showing you the basics, how to set up these things. Play around with the knobs, have fun with them. Remember, you can always have this engaged, and even with the effects, it tells you what each knob is. But basics for the delay, this is your delay time. This is when this is engaged, the tempo sync means that it's going to follow your song. but your song has to be recorded. If it's all live, it would have to be recorded to a metronome. If you're sequencing, then hey, great, it follows it all automatically. But our little audio snippet isn't following anything, so I'm going to take that off. Here's where I would set up my delay time. Shorter, longer. You can see even longer. Now, your feedback is, think of it as signal coming into the delay and being fed back into the delay to give you more bounces, you might say, on those snares. So let's try bringing that up and you'll see what I mean. You guys can see how the delays are just bouncing across. Usually you don't want to bring it up too much. You can bring it up to the point where it starts almost oscillating itself. So be careful with that feedback. You can overdo it very easily. Alright, so notice that I did that all again. I have control over the delay level. I have that sent through a bus over to the delay. And let's say, where's my, here, my vocal will be over here. If you guys remember, track number 4. I could actually come over here, go, well, I want my voice to be delayed. I add it. So there's my send. Now I can feed that vocal into, let me turn on that EQ. Allow more of my vocal to go through than the radio.
Wanted frequencies and make the vocal clearer. By using your EQ, you're able to remove unwanted frequencies and make the vocal clearer. By using your EQ, you're able to remove unwanted frequencies and make the vocal clearer.
So you guys can see, you could stack multiple things, in other words, and set up blends. So think of these as faders into your delay unit, which is then, of course, showing up on the aux, and you have full control of that. This gives you total capabilities of how to use time-based effects without changing the dynamics of that original track. That's why time-based effects, again, I can't stress this enough, you need to set them up in a send, feeding a bus, and on the aux you actually put that time-based effect. Now real quick, I see you guys are messaging each other about track number 6. That will be empty, and remember track number 6 is just for us to visualize. So we put that one to record while we're working on track number 5, and we can actually see how that compressor is affecting our actual signal using the attack, the decay, and the compression. You'll see you could bring it down, you could do all the different things and create envelopes on the actual sound. So this is just for a visual aid. So even when you're writing, again, this is just like Immersive Part 1 where you have to write the 2 to 4 sentences. When you're writing sentences, you don't have to write anything for track 6. Just write for track 5 and explain how what you're seeing and hearing and how the compressor is working for you. Track 7, 8, and then lastly number 9. So you still have only 4 tracks to write stuff about. All right, so that's time-based effects. Back to that. Take off these things. You guys see in the mixer window, I'm able to see quickly that, hey, this track right here is being sent to bus number 10, and if you guys follow it, you can see right up here the input bus number 10. So signals coming out of here basically being fed into this channel strip and then comes up on another fader. Let's solo that again. Let's bring back, now I could have delay and reverb. Let's say I want more reverb. You're really able to add to that sound. All right, going back to the instructions over here, if you guys remember, again, write 2 to 4 sentences for each track. Take a screenshot of each track as you do with the plugin open, and take your session file that you're working on in Logic. Now all you need to do really is change it to do a save as, and then part 2. Upload the or bounce first and then upload track 9 with the time-based effects, the delay and reverb, just like I showed you. So that'll be an MP3 that you guys are going to be uploading. Go ahead and put that up there as well, and you could, as always, use your grading checklist to help you make sure that you have everything turned in. So you have your screenshots, you have your 2 to 4 sentences for each track, you have your submitted Logic session, again with your last name, first name, immersive, and this one is part 2, and submitted bounce track 9 with the send and aux examples. In other words, it has the delay and the reverb as an MP3. So upload that, and we'll be able to, you know, from that we'll be able to come back and help you as far as if you're seeing that you're not getting any of the concepts. All right, guys, let me go ahead and open up the mics one more time. Mute that TV. And this TV.
Computer case. It was in the living room.
And another TV. All right. Any questions for me on Immersive Part 2?
Yeah, I had a question about when we submit the Logic file. Do you want it as the package?
Ah, okay. So each time we actually tell you what we want. This one, technically, we don't need the audio files because you're sending us back the with the ad. No, actually, you are sending audio files on this one. So yes, send this as a package.
All right.
So for you guys, you would have to do a save as, and just make sure that package is selected here. You know, of course, name it the correct way with your last name, first name, Immersive Part 2. Any other questions? No questions, apparently. Okay, guys. Hopefully I've shown you quite a bit, and you really start understanding, especially after you've played around with it and get to experience using, you know, the EQs, using the compressors, using the gates. You've seen how I could use the multimeter or the channel EQ on the output just to view what's happening frequency-wise. But you don't get to mess around and add dynamic effects to change the audio and time-based effects to add to that audio, and understanding how to correctly set them up. And I've explained why it's so important. It will make you know, a huge difference in your mixes. They'll become clearer and you'll have a lot more control over it.
I had a quick question. I'm sorry.
Sure, Brian, go ahead.
When you're setting up bus sends for effects, is it best to start at Unity and then work backwards, or would you ever bump up above Unity in those bus sends?
Yeah. If the signal isn't so, well, here. On an input, quite often you'll see if it's, no, I don't see any input metering. On a lot of them will show some sort of input metering. You could see what the input level is coming in. But you don't want to bring it in so loud that it starts distorting that plugin. So usually what I do is I will start bringing it up, bringing it into it. Still, I have that, you know, reverb as unity gain as far as the output, and I start bringing it in until it sounds really good, that I like how the reverb is affecting that sound, then I can control that reverb in the mix via its level output on the aux. So,
and another thing I've discovered by accident playing around with the bus sends this week is if you put a bus send on your auxiliary, you create a really nasty loop that'll make a terrible noise.
Oh, yes. Great point. I've told many students about that. Right here, if, for instance, I have aux, which is that reverb, well, that reverb is being sent into the, it's being sent into the reverb via bus 10. If I come over here, this is what he's talking about. If I select that same bus, well, think about it. If I turn this up, basically, I'm not even going to do it all the way, but basically I'm sending signal and it's coming back in. And coming back in. And looping, this is a feedback loop. So basically, you don't want to put the same bus on that same aux that's being fed by that exact same bus. So yes, that's called a feedback loop, and in analog it's even worse than in the digital. That's when you get that ring and all of a sudden everybody's like covering their ears. So in the analog world, if you're doing live stuff, definitely keep away from any feedback loops like that. In the digital world, Logic tries to suppress some of that stuff so it won't happen. But at the same time, it's still not helping your audio. So your sound won't sound correct. So very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions, guys? No other questions.
I got a question that's kind of off topic.
No worries. Go ahead.
So I've done a lot of mixing of my own music, and I've noticed that when I try to, I guess, mimic other mixes, like commercial sounding music, the vocals, the lead vocals sound so narrow, but like in your face. Is that because of the mic that they're using, or is it like the EQ settings that they're using, and with the
it's a combination of things. You started to break up there, but from what I'm gathering, you're saying that the on the commercial mixes, you quite often you'll really hear the vocals in there, kind of reeling in your face, and they really cut through the mix. That has a lot to do with EQ and compression. Those two things together can really make something either bring out and cut through the mix very easily. So yes, the compression and both the compression and EQing will help your vocals enormously. That's can make a night and day difference. If you remember one point that I said about the compressor, it changes the dynamic range. So in other words, it squashes it down, so it makes the singer more even. So imagine now in the mix, since the singer is set more evenly and he's set to a certain level, you'll be able to hear all of the words that the singer is singing, versus where if he was all over the place and it's uncompressed, there are many times where you hear the song and you're like, I'm not quite sure what he just said. I could hear it all to that one point, because then he gets masked by other instruments and other sounds. That's why the compressor brings it up, makes it all the same level, and then the EQ can make you make notches, you might say, in the mixes, where now anytime the singer sings, he'll cut right through. He's got an open spot there in the mix to be able to be heard. So both the EQ and the compressor definitely help your vocals out. They'll actually show you this more in the mixing class that you guys will be taking a little later. But any other questions? You guys are more than welcome to ask, even if it's off topic like that. I don't mind covering it for you guys. I see a question asked as far as which would you do first, EQ or compressor? Very good question. Now, remember, the compressor feeds off of levels. So if I EQ first, I could actually EQ out the vocal. Let's give the example. Remember that vocal that we have that we're having to clean up? Well, remember that high frequency tone would actually trigger that compressor. So I would actually, in that case, want to EQ first, remove that high frequency tone, then use the compressor to make my vocal, better, follow through, more even, and so forth. So most cases, I would say probably EQ first, then compress. But there might be times where you actually, for instance, the guitars, I see a lot of guitarists do this. They'll compress first and then they'll EQ out because they like what the compressor is doing, but there's certain frequencies out of that compressor that they just didn't like. So it's got a lot to do with, the situation. Majority of the time, yes, EQ, compressor. Same thing with a gate. It would be mainly EQ, then gate first. With compressor and gate, if you want to do both those, I would definitely recommend there, I want to gate the signal first before I compress it. Because if I do it the other way, remember, I'm changing on the dynamic range with the compressor, I'm squishing down the dynamic range, and my gate is looking for dynamic range to be able to open and close. If you make it all even, then it's going to probably stay open most of the time where you don't want it. So gating before compressor, definitely. The EQ, more so situational. But usually, yes, the EQ will be first, then the gate, then the compressor.
Being a guitar player, and you were just talking about, we like to compress and then EQ.
Mm-hmm.
If you're about to do a mix in a recording, could you EQ, then compress that EQ, and then EQ that after it comes out of the compressor?
Sure.
Or would it kind of,
no,
defeat its own self?
No. By EQing your sound, you'll get a different sound first of your guitar. So let's say your guitar isn't very bright. As far as the high-end frequencies, you want it to be brighter. Well, I could EQ the brightness up a little bit. Then I'd compress the whole signal. Then after it's compressed, I hear the honk of the guitar too much. Well, then now I could go back and EQ a second time after the compressor and remove that honking sound.
And would you set that secondary EQ up? Would you set it on a bus, send bus?
No, because I'm wanting to change the original signal, I'd go ahead and put it in the signal path. So for instance,
just put it like you'd have EQ, compressor, EQ in the stack?
Yep, I'd have EQ first, then I'd go over to the compressor. And let me just close these so we can still see. So you can see I'm EQing the guitar signal, compressing it, and then I'm coming back and I'm going to EQ it again. There's nothing wrong with doing those three like that. Where I'm stacking.
So that stack works like a pedal chain in a guitar pedal thing.
Yes.
So whatever's first is what's hitting what you're getting first, and whatever's lowest down is the last thing out.
Correct.
Okay.
Think of it as signals coming in from the input. Right here it's bus 33 according to this. Hits my EQ, then my compressor, then another EQ, and then goes to the fader. That's my channel path. This is all got to do with signal flow. And a guitar works the same way. You have the signal flow. In that case, you're actually using physical cables, patch cables from one guitar pedal to the other, but you're still following a chain or a path that your signal is going through.
Thank you.
Sure. Hold on. Time tools. Busing is only when you use time tools. All right. Let me see if I can answer that. I'm kind of lost with that question. Go back up, see if there's something we're talking about. Are you talking about, is busing in Pro Tools? Yes, you have buses also in Pro Tools, and any DAW. You're going to have sends feeding buses. Where it's located depends on the actual DAW, in other words, the digital audio workstation, how they have it set up. But everywhere, you're going to always have sends to give you capability of feeding an aux. I see another question is, do delays go off of, let me open up the delay, do they basically sync up to the track? Yes, if you have this engaged. Right here you see tempo sync. It will lock up automatically to the tempo that your sequencer is moving to. Here, instead of it being delay times, you could see I'm actually moving triplets, 16th notes, quarter note triplets. I mean, I could make it half notes. I could anything I need to. So you'll see it actually moves it by whatever I want. So if you guys are taking music or know a little music theory, you know what I'm talking about. So it's syncing up, and your delays could be for 8th notes off of that actual snare. So it's all up to you. If you don't want it to follow it, of course you can shut it off and then manually set it up. And here's a neat trick for everybody. If you open up a calculator, there we go. If you want to know how many milliseconds every quarter note is, I could actually tell you exactly. All you need to do is, well, 60,000. So I've got 60,000 divided by the tempo of your song. So let's say we have a song that's 120 beats per second. Or minute, I'm sorry. That would be awfully fast. 120 beats per minute. Right there equals 500. So that's 500 milliseconds is a quarter note. So I would just come over here, I could type it in. 500. That means if my tempo of my song is 120 beats per minute, that would be equal to 1 quarter note. If you want to make it an 8th note, I just cut that in half. So that'd be 250. If I want to make it a whole note, well, I double it. So it'd be actually quadruple it to make it a whole note. So half would be half note. So I'd go 1,000. 2,000s would be a full bar. So you're able to figure it all out. This is always good to know because let's say you're working in an analog circuitry system. It's a live console. You have analog console and you have a delay unit sitting over to the side of you. It's not going to be able to lock up to the song, but you guys already, I just showed you how simple it is. You could figure out the tempo of the song. You could simply just type in 60,000 divided by entering the tempo of the song, and that'll give you a quarter note delay. If you are working with an audio, let's say I brought in audio into Logic, I don't know the tempo, there's actually a cool plugin. I can select the track that I want, and right over here, where is it? There it is. Under metering, you guys have a beat counter. When I hit play, it'll tell me what the tempo of the song is. It'll actually calculate it out for you. Instead of having to sit here and count how many hits you have per minute, you could actually put this plug in, hit play on the song, and you would actually be able to see exactly what your tempo is of that recorded song. So another trick for you guys, if you do remixes, this is an amazing tool. I love it whenever I'm doing any kind of remixes. Turn on the beat counter. I grab the loop or whatever I've sampled, put it in there. I can figure out exactly what my tempo of that loop is. That way I can set up my tempo of the song. Now every single loop fits in perfectly when editing within Logic. This is why I say Logic is great for making songs or making beats and making stuff happen. And if you're just dealing with only audio and you wouldn't really want to edit, well then Pro Tools would be a better choice for there. If it's all live.
I got another question.
Yes, Damien, go ahead.
So let's say I produce a beat and I'm trying to find the song key of the beat. So let's say if I wanted to tune my vocals, how do I find the song key? Because what I usually do is I'll just bounce the file down and then I'll import it into Virtual DJ and then it'll tell me the song key and then I just go back into Logic and input the song key. Is there an easier way that I can find the song key within Logic so I don't have to go back and forth through the app?
That's actually a good question. I don't think any of the. I mean, this is where you set up pitch and so forth, the pitch shift and so forth. You could also do something called flex time within Logic, that you could change the key of a song. But I don't think it tells me what the original key is. Oops, wrong one. That's flex time here. Yeah, no, I'm not.
Because I noticed
I'll be honest with
when
you.
I use, I think it's Tuner.
Tuner will be like, for instance, so you could
Tuner?
actually tune a guitar right in Logic. It's real simple to tune your guitar right through Logic.
I don't know if.
But vocal wise, you almost have to know some music theory to be able to tell what key the song is in. Because yes, you could tell you that, oh yes, your vocal is in pitch or not in pitch, but it won't tell you the key of the physical song. You almost have to either have sheet music or know enough music theory to be able to actually say, okay, well, I could definitely hear he's doing all white notes, so this would be the key of C. So I apologize. I'm not 100% sure if there's a plugin for that. There might be one out there. I've never used one for that purpose. I've never run into where I need to figure out the key of a song. Usually I could either, if I have to, I look it up real quick. If it's a remix of something, I can look it up real quick, Google the song. It'll tell you, which key it's written in and so forth. So I apologize about that. I don't really know that one. If any of you guys do know if there's a plugin out there for that, maybe you could post it in the discussion forum for you guys, and that'll help everybody out. If I spot it, I'll definitely, I'll check around and see if there's something out there that'll actually tell you the key of a song just by playing it through that plugin. I'm sure that I know there's stuff out there. I just don't know of a plugin that'll do that within Logic, right off the top of my head. Is that important? Someone's asking. No, not really. If you're doing remixes and stuff, usually you could look up the song for a remix. If you're just doing your own stuff, you're able to, at least if something's written with a certain key, you could write in the same key to add more to a single loop for remixing. So for someone who's actually creating music, that might be more important than actually mixing. If you're just engineering something, you probably won't ever have to think about the key. It's the producers who are actually producing the song that would be more. When you hear the vocal, you'll immediately be able to hear that the vocalist is either in or off of key, and it just naturally, it just doesn't sound right if the singer is off key. Change pitch of vocal. Can you change the pitch of a vocal? Yes. I was just showing you guys in one of the plugins, right under pitch, you actually have pitch correction. You also have flex time, which shows a way of fixing the pitch when a singer goes sharp or flat in a single part of the song as he's singing. There's also pitch shift, which can shift the whole song to a different key. Or you see right here, I could bring it up by cents and semitones. You'd want to, if you want to change the whole thing, you want to make it mix 100%, so that way we hear nothing but the changed. Because if I have it 50-50, then I still hear original and the pitched one. But that's how you would apply pitch change on a vocal. And then lastly, this vocal transformer. I've actually used this a couple times and I'll show you how I've done this towards week 4, to where we changed in the background singers. We wanted to add a female singer, and it was only 2 guys there singing. So I actually tricked the listener into thinking that we had, multiple people singing the choruses, the backgrounds, including females. And I'll show you how you could do that using that vocal transformer. Any little EQing. Alright, anything else? No other questions from you guys? Okay, everybody's quiet, so I guess there's no other questions. Hopefully you guys got a lot out of this live session. I know you guys had a lot of great questions earlier, and I don't mind, like I said, I don't mind spending a little time, even if it's off topic, but to show you guys stuff. Know that you guys will be getting into this stuff more in depth as you guys move through to other classes. This is just the beginning class, so don't, threat if you, don't get the compressor just yet. You're going to have plenty of other chances. Same thing with the EQ. Hopefully we'll be able to detect that from your responses, and we'll be able to come back to you and tell you, hey, this is how the EQ works, or you're doing this wrong, or so forth. So that's why we have you, write those 2 to 4 sentences for each track. That way we get a better idea as to how much of it you're, truly getting and understanding that concept. So definitely, the more you write in there, the better feedback I'll even be able to give you. So remember, Thursday and Sunday is when those assignments are due. Thursday is the first one, and part 2 will be on Sunday. And if you have any other questions that you think of afterwards, please feel free, email us. We'll get back to you as soon as possible with an answer for you. So if you run into any problems, definitely. And if you run into any technical problems, remember you still have FSO, both FSO support as well as also the tech lines. Alright guys, since there's no other questions, I guess we'll call it a night, and you guys can get started with your assignments if that's what you're going to work on tonight. You guys are welcome. I see some thank yous there. Again, if you think of anything, please just email us and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. If not, you guys take care, and good night everybody.